Hi, Iskra. How are you?
Hi, how are you? I'm fine.
Good,
Nice to be
good.
here.
Yeah, so glad to have you. And thanks for everyone for coming early on time, all of that. But yeah, Iskra, really glad to be with you here today. This is Elizabeth. We've been emailing.
Yeah, nice to finally hear your voice.
I know, right? Are you in Madrid?
Yes.
Nice. How is it
Where are
there?
you? Where are you based?
I'm in New York right now, and it is like flooding. I don't know if you've seen videos, but the subways are like actually bursting at the seams, and we're getting flood warnings every like 10 minutes. It's really wild.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but
No, here is better. Here is Spain. Sunny all the day.
yeah,
Different thing.
that's awesome. Hi, Zach. Hi, Alex. So great to have you here.
Hi, happy to be here.
Hi, folks. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. And to all of you who are here already, thank you. Hi, Benna. I see you. Fungible Wise. Hi, everyone. If y'all wouldn't mind tweeting about the space, we can bring some more people in. There were quite a few people who had set reminders. We'll get started at 5 after the hour, I think, to just let everyone file in. But wondering, Zach, where are you calling in from?
I'm in New York. It's a crazy mess today.
Isn't it wild? Have you seen videos of the subways? Like, it's
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I took our daughter to school today, and it was crazy.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. It's like it seems like it's kind of lightened up a bit, but who knows what's going to happen later.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely. And around 9 or 10 a.m., it was just like, yeah, there's so much water on the street.
Yeah, it is wild. But the city's been through a lot. It'll survive this.
Yeah, yeah.
And Alex, are you calling in from London?
I am. It is not raining in London, but that is a rare occurrence.
Yeah, you sent it all this way.
I don't have that much power.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Um, well, I am so excited to have this conversation today. It's amazing that it's your first time talking about this piece, Zach and Ishka. Really honored.
Yeah, I'm excited that we have this chance.
Yeah, it's gonna be great. Well, it is recorded, so we may as well get started and then people can file in or listen back if they've missed the beginning. How does that sound?
Perfect.
Great. All right, let's get started. Hello and welcome to the Source Talk series. My name is Elizabeth Sweet and I'm the communications lead at Feral File. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Iskra Velitchkova, Zach Lieberman, and Alex Estorick for a conversation on the edges of code as part of the Source Talk series. Iskra and Zach's piece, Horizontes, is exhibiting in Source, a non-commercial exhibition on Feral File featuring artworks made in the last several years, which use software as a medium. The Source curators, Operator, Deafbeef, and Casey Reas, spent hours discussing generative works that have impacted them over the years. Here's an excerpt from the curator's statement. This is not an attempt at a survey exhibition or defining a new canon. This is simply a selection of work that the four of us are thinking about right now. For those of us in the middle of art, code, and blockchains for the last few years, there's been little to no time to pause and reflect on what has happened. Source is our attempt to do just that collaboratively. Now, Anya Catherine and Deja T from Operator, Deafbeef, and Casey Reas wrote wonderfully thoughtful and rich descriptions on each of the 25 works exhibiting in Source, and I highly recommend you go check those out after the talk. A thread with bits from Casey's reflection on Horizontes has been to the top of the chat, so do feel free to read that. Now, before we start, I just want to say thank you so much to Iskra and Ishkra and Zach. We're really grateful to exhibit your iconic work here on Feral File, and I'm really thrilled that you're part of the Source Talk series. And as I mentioned earlier, this is the first time that you've both been on a space together to speak about this piece. You minted it back in July 2022, and it was quite the coup, both conceptually and aesthetically. And I'm really excited to dive into it here and really honored that this is the space where you'll first talk about it together. So before I pass it over, I just also want to say thank you to Alex Estorick, editor-in-chief of Right Click Save, for moderating today. As always, I'm really grateful for your collaboration, and I really appreciate you taking the time and effort to lead the conversation. So with that, I will pass it over to Alex. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks very much, Elizabeth, and thanks for the invitation. It's obviously having such a range of curators, I think, has produced a very broad and important spectrum of projects. And obviously, I think, from a personal perspective, we've not really had the chance to talk from Right Click Save with either Zach or Iskra about their practices. So I'm personally very excited to have that chance now. I am also conscious, Zach, of your role with open frameworks. And I think that there are a number of conversations that I think a Twitter space like this might engage in to do with language, whether that's C++ or anything else, and also the communities that use code. And from a personal perspective, what interests me perhaps the most about generative art is the potential that it can produce a kind of disruptive politics, emergent outcomes, both visually, but also beyond the purely visual. And so from my perspective, I think from having had a little bit of knowledge about your work in advance of this, it seems to me, one of the things that is a thread that's running through the generative art conversation recently is the notion of co-creation. And when people reference co-creation, they tend to reference the extent to which artists these days, whether via a project like QQL or FX Params, are allowing collectors a stake in the creative process. And it seems to me that what makes this a very interesting and unusual project is that this is an artistic collaboration. That itself is not unusual. But the way that you structured that collaboration, I think, is quite interesting. And so maybe starting with Iskra, I'd love to hear about how the collaboration was structured, and actually whether the results of the collaboration surprised you at all.
Yeah, well, thank you, Alex, for the presentation. Yeah, once again, very happy to be here. And this is indeed the first time that we talk about this. We are together, Zach and me, and I guess we needed a year, more than a year, to realize, the project, and that's a fantastic opportunity to dive, in the project. So the beginning of, I say Horizontes. I mean, it's a slightly different pronunciation, but I'm not sure which is the right one. So the first time that the way that we started with this thing was, I remember FX Hash was organizing this huge celebration after 1 year of activity, and they, invited people to do a collaboration. And I think that was a very nice step in order to, connect more the people in the community. That's all about. And I remember they wrote me, as I guess they wrote many other people, to participate. And I was in this huge hurricane of projects of 2022. I mean, crazy year. And I just had to decline because I was really, it was very impossible for me to do that. And I think they wrote again, and I said again no, something that is very difficult to me to say no. And I said, no, really sorry, guys, I can't. And then I found this DM by Zach, and he wrote me proposing this collaboration. And I was a bit, Zach, in shock, because I've been following you for a long time, way before this thing. When I was working in data visualization, Zach is, one of the maestros, of the field. And I had the chance to go to many conferences around the world following, and I had the chance to see him, and for me it was, of course, even if I don't have time, I can find it, overnight. So let's do that. And that was the beginning for me. And the rest of the story is very simple, actually. We decided, first of all, take it easy and just getting to know each other. That was from the very beginning a very nice approach, I think. we started discussing, what can we do. But I mean, from the very, very beginning, everything was very smooth. We were not constrained about anything that we had to do, any kind of dogma, this is going to be an orthodox project or we need to achieve something concrete. Nothing. It was just about, having conversations and getting to know each other. And then at some point we came up with this idea of why don't we do that? I mean, let's find this concept of finding a common idea, in this case was horizontes. That was not the first concept, I think. I don't know, Zach, but I think that came with the time. But first we just decided to say, okay, let's find a way to do this thing of me as me, you as me. And it was like a challenge. How can we represent the other's work and, iterate with this me as you as me, these kind of things. And we started working on many, many, many different projects or systems, let's say. And without any pressure of how we're going to combine everything, it was just, sharing, then, talking about the day or whatever. And that was for me the food, for my inspiration, those conversations. And, at some point, just everything came together. We decided to close it in these systems. And then we just put everything together. And that's the story. When something that happened to us, it was when we released the project, and I'm sure we're going to discuss that later, but it was a bit confusing for a few people, that's a very weird thing. But then I just saw the grid, and for me, it was unexpected how consistent everything was for me. For me, it's a very colorful, bright project, and everything like made sense at the end. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. This is like, those are the highlights of how I experienced everything.
Thank you, Iskra. Just staying with you one moment. I know one of the things that I was struck by is this idea of placing each other in each other's shoes. Of course, generative art is often reliant on open source code. And in many respects, I think a lot of projects are layerings of or layerings of coded surface, I suppose. And I just wonder, how maybe that changed in this context, because of course, as an individual generative artist, you might use your own code, you might rework other code, but I'm interested in how this particular process of dual working did it produce something different than you might have produced on your own? Did it produce more than the sum of its parts, perhaps?
Well, I think there is something interesting in how we build the whole thing. And I think I did a very personal style. I mean, very connected with what I've been doing. But at the same time, I've been always, as everyone here, amazed by this light projection in the works of Zach. And that's, how he plays with the shaders and, the light and the movement and everything. And I've never done that before. I haven't. So for me, it was very challenging. How can I achieve that thing with my practice, which is mostly, or at that time, I was very much focused on playing with lines, and playing with the widths of the lines and how that can create shades and volumes and things. And the challenge for me was achieve that thing by playing with color, basically. I mean, if I use my technique, but then I play and I iterate a lot with the background and with the lines and with everything, my question was if I was able, create this sense of light. So everything was beyond the technical side, let's say. For me, it was more a conceptual perspective of how can I use my tools, to get closer to his style.
Thank you. Zach, I wonder, I'm conscious, there are artists that I have spoken with who are resistant to collaboration. not because necessarily they don't want to collaborate, but because they feel most comfortable working solo. It seems to me that you're someone who understands that generative art is, I think, historically, or at least certainly with projects like Open Frameworks or P5JS processing, generative art is a generous art. Now, as I understand it, one of the sort of staples of this project was this idea that each of you would occupy three challenges, three roles. You would be me as me, so Zach as Zach, Zach as Iskra, and then Zach as Iskra as Zach. And I wonder if you could just perhaps explain that kind of process of sort of cognitive leaping that fed into this.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was really fun that we stumbled into that construction. When we first started to talk about collaboration, we didn't want it to be a kind of mashup. Like, the thing that we really wanted to avoid is kind of, a bit of like, a bit of one style, a bit of another style, but actually to kind of use this as an opportunity to get to know each other's work. And I didn't know Iskra personally, but I've been a really big fan of the works that I had seen. And for me, it just seemed like a really great opportunity to kind of think about and meditate about her work and try to understand it. And I actually think this is a kind of a gift. It was like a gift we gave each other, but also just generally a gift of, it's a challenge as an artist to understand how other people see your work. I think that is the one like superpower that I wish I had, or that I wish I could give to other artists, is this notion of seeing with somebody else's eyes, seeing how they see your work. And that, for us, that was this kind of really interesting opportunity. And as we started to kind of get into this idea, we thought about could we create something that was a bit confusing, or, almost like not necessarily, I mean, that was one of the things that we experimented with. But in the end, this notion of me as me, me as you, me as you as me, proved to be really interesting and give us a lot of time to think and to meditate. And I spent a lot of time looking at Iskra's work and imagining how I would create that using my own approach. And I remember days where I was just playing with lines, because Iskra's work is so much about kind of just like lines on top of lines on top of lines. And I remember just kind of sketching and sketching and sketching and feeling I was getting nowhere. And it was only when we kind of gave ourselves the liberty to express with our own voice, to use our own techniques, but to really try to see that in the voice of the other, that it felt really kind of magical. That actually, when I sort of stepped away from lines and I said, okay, I'm gonna use gradients, or I'm gonna use color, or I'm gonna use the things that I feel really kind of like I have a lot of control over, but actually try to use them to describe what I see in Iskra's work. And I think some of my favorite phone calls or conversations that we had were just when we would get on the call and actually say like what we saw in the other's work. And, for me, it was just a really generous opportunity to collaborate.
Thank you. I'm conscious of the title of this conversation is Edges of Code, which I think is really lovely. I think it might have been Elizabeth who came up with that. And it seems to me that the subject of the horizon is helpful in the sense that I suppose a horizon is material in one sense. It's also apparently immaterial in another. And I wonder, Zach, just thinking a little bit more about the materiality of code, its texture and so forth. I think of generative art on the one hand, I think of as a sort of, in some ways, a born digital project. On the other hand, I'm conscious that I think still the most high resolution output is a physical print or even a plot. And I just wonder, if you might, whether this project perhaps changed how you thought about the materiality of code, or where it sits between sort of, dare I say, physical and digital.
I'm not sure if I have a good answer for that. I would say, there's something that I see in Iskra's work, which is a kind of it feels like very oftentimes very architectural and oftentimes very kind of infinite. And I was yeah I I don't know. Yeah, I'm not totally sure. Maybe Iskra has a better way to answer that question.
I'm not sure which is a question, Alex.
So I think, what I'm really trying to get at here is the importance of the horizon. I mean, it seems to me that it's important in a formal sense, as a unifier, but it's also important from a kind of conceptual standpoint.
Yeah. I think the horizons, for me, it was kind of seeing Uninhabitable, like responding to that project and seeing this kind of strong and dominant horizon line and thinking that could be a great, we were really looking for kind of a graphical anchor to base the work on. And so that was one of the ones that we landed on.
Yeah, I think as I said before, I'm not sure if that came first. I think that came weeks later. We just allowed ourselves, just to explore the style of the other one, and then at some point we had to find a connection between all of the systems. And I think maybe from I'm not, maybe it was because of Uninhabitable, but I think it came just naturally, playing with these shapes and at some point, this kind of horizontal line came, but it just emerged from the process. And I think that's a very nice analogy to what we do with generative art, and what came from this project, actually, this kind of concept of emergence from the code, and how you were surprised by the result. So I think the concept itself as well came with this, in this natural way.
Thank you. I wonder if I can, because obviously I have a tendency to disappear. Whether we could bring it back to the tools themselves that you used. Were you using the same languages? Were you working on the same code? Were you working on the same document, so to speak, or how did you kind of join forces? Because I'm just thinking from a lay perspective, the idea of as it were inhabiting the mind of another artist, it could be might lead one to feel very paralyzed. I don't know, but it doesn't seem that has been in any way the effect on you both.
No, it was really I think it was really straightforward. We had I think there was we used P5.js, and I think there was a Zach.js and an Iskra.js file, and they were almost like two different universes, because my work was completely shader based, and so when the software was running Zach.js, it would kind of create a WebGL context and draw in a certain way. And Iskra's work was very line oriented and not using WebGL and using kind of traditional P5.js mode. And so it was almost like two different pathways that the code can go down. And then we created this kind of central framework for running it.
And I just want to, I mean, it seems to me, one of the things that I think is interesting about generative art is that it has this sort of binary quality. It's, on the one hand, you're trading in language in a sense, but there is a visual output at the end of it. I just wonder whether the experience of working with code in this instance was fundamentally different, and whether actually it's had consequences on your own individual practices as a result, and maybe Iskra. So.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure how to answer that thing, because it was it felt very weird. I mean, we were both working on our own system, but at the same time, it was not only 3 things. It was, as I said before, more than 10 or 15, at least in my case, because I was very, unsure what was, which was the best way, to represent this me as me or me as you or whatever. So I ended up having a very large spectrum of landscapes and moods. I created this kind of, that's very funny, remembering I created this field like a farm. That was one of the systems. Another one was like a sunset. Then I created this rain. Then I ended up doing what I called the end of the world. I mean, it was very, very funny, how, and I think at some point maybe Zach, you were quite desperate, because I was never finishing anything. But at the same time, it was very challenging. But then at some point, I just said, okay, Iskra, you need to stop here, and you need to find, a common field, because I felt all the time that even if Zach, was creating as well a lot of systems, he had this consistency, and there was something very common in the 3 systems, and I really wanted to get close to that thing, to make, everything work better. So, the translation between the code and the output for me was very, very challenging here, because my way of coding basically comes from iterating a lot on previous systems. So everything, even if it seems so different, comes from a very similar code, which I just, play with crazy scales, crazy widths of the lights, and of the lines and everything. So at the same time, it's different, but comes from a very common code. So the challenge was, how to direct, how to find a direction to just create this mood. And that was my biggest conflict.
And there are so many like outtakes. I feel like we have so many, every once in a while, like Iskra will post on social, like, here's something that I was planning for Horizontes. And I have the same thing where I have a bunch of kind of different directions that we had gone in. And I think that was one of the most exciting parts of the project, is actually just this back and forth. Is like every time we jump on a call, we'd have this kind of like portfolio of new things that we had invented. And I loved, especially Iskra had her, at some point she sent me the code and I was running it, and it just like, she saves a screenshot every time she refreshes the browser. It was like phenomenal. Like, I could have not imagined what her hard drive must look like, but it was just this like intensely iterative way of working. And we both have the similar quality, which is this kind of like, change it and change it and change it and break it and come back and change it more. And so that was, I think, probably one of the most enjoyable parts of the project, is just being able to do that together and to have that kind of, conversations about what's interesting and what we see in the other.
Yeah, and also, as you said before, I think the most beautiful thing was this kind of weekly feedback, by someone that you respect a lot. And that was very rewarding, I think, and also something frustrating, I think, from the process, and at the same time nice. It was this kind of sensation that, okay, I created 15 systems, I could just release, like a different project, but let's forget about this and put everything in this common bag, and just release it as one. And that was yeah, I'm not sure how to explain that, but that felt very very nice. I mean, how you just give all that you have, for the common purpose. And yeah, that felt like, I like this idea.
Thank you. I think what strikes me, looking through the just the sheer range of outputs from the project, from a sort of lay perspective, one is in the habit of looking at long form projects that have a pretty consistent visual code, but it seems to me that actually this sort of the visual code is strikingly various here, and I wonder whether that reflects the different influences that you both have on your work. And perhaps Zach, perhaps you could say a little bit about the inspiration for your work, but also perhaps you can explain to me why what I'm looking at is so varied and yet so consistent, it seems to me.
Yeah, I mean, in some way, somebody after the project was released, somebody said it was almost like a retrospective, like it was a kind of celebration. It was a chance for us to celebrate our work and celebrate our kind of our the way we create work, which is in this really kind of iterative way. In the case of my work, I spent a lot of time looking at the kind of like in Iskra's work, there's a real like delicacy, like a use of line and transparency and layering that I feel is not something that I'm used to seeing in generative art. It just felt really different. And I remember like the earliest days seeing her work, having, seeing these like very delicate, almost organic, birds, and these, they're not creatures, but they are creatures, seeing these things. So I spent a lot of time thinking about kind of how would I achieve that lightness, right? How could I achieve that kind of transparency, that luminous energy that I saw in her work? And then I also noticed that she was taking these photographs of curtains, but also coding. She was sketching curtains. She was creating kind of layers with the lines that felt kind of somewhat architectural, but kind of referencing these curtain forms. And for me, it was kind of picking up on those visual cues, those things that I was really excited about from her work, that I would then try to say, okay, from my perspective, which is really working in shaders and gradients and color and light, how could I convey that? How could I respond to that? And it really pushed me. I think it was a fun challenge.
For me, I think, as I said before, the key was how can I achieve this light and brightness that is so particular of Zach's work, and knowing that I don't have, the tools, I don't know, how to do that in his way. So I needed to find my own way. And so that was like visually, that was my purpose. But then answering your question about the consistency, Alex, and how variety is everything, I think we had something very clear in mind, which was, as Zach said, that was a celebration. And I think you expressed it in a very nice way, a celebration of our process. I mean, that's very nice, I think. And for me, it was, I'm always kind of, not obsessed, but almost about what does, this practice mean, and what is a long form, what does a one-of-one mean, and what is the story. And, so for me, it was a very nice opportunity, because I realized from the first moment that Zach was open to whatever, that creative pulse that he has. I mean, we can do whatever we want, that's we're doing art. So for me, it's very interesting how the concept of long form, which is beautiful, I mean, this kind of openness to say, okay, I build that thing, and then I open those parameters, and I kind of, create an infinite number of variations. That's something that I enjoy doing. And at the same time, I like to call all these things just generative explorations. Let's say you don't need to follow, these kind of rules, but you can establish a story, in the way that you present. For 100 pieces or 1,000 pieces, you can create a story. And I think our story there was two people connecting, and that was the way that, with this, in this way, we presented the work visually. I mean, this is a conversation, and sometimes you hear the other's voice. Sometimes you say something, sometimes you agree, sometimes you don't agree, and you have this kind of mess. And this is a conversation. This is not a monologue, let's say. And I think that's something particularly different in that one, that we focused, I think, more on the story that we wanted to create, and that's consistent itself. If it's not consistent visually, it's consistent intellectually, let's say. That's how I see
it. The other thing that was, I think, really kind of playing onto the notion of conversation is like, after we worked on this project, we kept seeing each other's work everywhere. Like I remember, like, I don't know, Iskra would send me a photograph of like, she's in an elevator and she sees a light and she's like, like, I see your work. And same thing for me. It was like, we had kind of like spent so much time looking at the other's work that we were kind of seeing it and noticing it wherever we were. And that was also seemed like kind of, yeah, really like generous part of this conversation.
Yes, I love what Iskra said about it not being a monologue, but being a conversation. It seems to me that I don't want to sort of generalize, especially from my position of almost total illiteracy, but I do feel that there is a sort of general stereotype of long form generative art, that you have a very large set of outputs that have, you know, a level of stability across them, and consistency, but also enough variety, so to speak, for the whole set to be visually interesting and for the individual outputs to be visually interesting as well. It seems to me, when I look at this, and I guess you would call it a long form project, it sort of emergence or surprise, shall we say, seems to be built into it, so that I'm kind of constantly surprised rather than kind of maybe seeking for some kind of grail-like, sort of outlier. I just wonder whether you feel the same, or whether that's a sort of rather basic analysis.
Yeah, I think for me it's a very fun system to explore, because as you said, you're going to be surprised all the time, and you can like that or not. I mean, I completely understand if someone is like, this is not what I was looking for. I mean, it's very different, but for me it's like very nice when I see, I don't know, a piece is being sold or whatever. I'm super, you know, interested in which one will be, you know. For me, it's built on a very different concept. There is no grail, because you don't have this rarity parameter. The rarity, I think, is the system itself and the approach. So there is no chance, you know, to detect exactly which is the grail. For me, honestly, is the Zach's Me as Me, because it's my favorite one. So when I see one of those, yeah, I just really enjoy that one. But this is a very personal approach. But yeah, I think there are many different things in this project regarding the classical long form, which I insist I really like, and I think it's a very delicate equilibrium to find this variety and at the same time the consistency. And we didn't have, let's say, this problem in this project, so that made it easier, let's say, in this way. But at the same time, we had other challenges, which were, how can we find, you know, this theoretical, you know, consistency. But yeah, we didn't have grails.
Yes, and Zach, I just want to sort of build on that. Just, I wonder whether there is a resistance on the part of artists to this sort of the logic of the grail, and the logic of the outlier, or even the logic of emergence as this kind of sort of almost sacred phenomenon.
Mm. I think there's a challenge sometimes, especially with long form work, which is figuring out kind of, sometimes the things that are the most beautiful are the most broken, right? Sometimes the things that are the most exciting are the things that are kind of at the edges of what's possible. And how do you create systems that kind of produce high quality work? Like, how do you celebrate the brokenness, and I think there's a tendency or a desire sometimes to kind of push everything towards the realm of beauty, or push everything towards the realm of consistency. And I think one of the most important dials is the kind of dial of the of the outlier, of the misfit, of the thing that really surprised you. And so I think the form is really interesting and kind of pushes you to ask a lot of questions as you're sketching, and seeing things that are exciting, seeing things that are horrifying. Like that part of it, I think, is really interesting. But I also generally find it a very hard way to work, because I'm so used to, I think some part of the art is actually in the curation. To me, I love selecting things. I love, sketching and sketching and sketching, and finding something that is the best version of that idea. And giving up some of that control is something I find really hard to do. And it was actually just this, it was the invitation from FX Hash. It was the fact that they reached out and we had this chance to collaborate that made it a lot easier for me, because it's not a forum that I'm like, oh, really excited about. I think the joy was actually working with Iskra and being really kind of lightweight about it, and just really focusing on how we could reflect each other's work. That made it easy. That made it kind of, enjoyable. Yeah.
If I could jump in here, this conversation has been wonderful. And it makes me think a lot about representation and expectation. I see you're representing not only each other, but yourselves, and then also yourselves as each other. And whenever we're representing something, there is this sort of expectation that comes along with it, I would think. And especially as artists, there's an expectation of your work and what it's going to mean to people, and et cetera, et cetera. And I'm wondering if this sort of practice that you two went through, this collaborative process of inhabiting or reflecting on each other's aesthetics and sort of representing each other, if this has changed the way, or if it sort of, if it had an impact on the way that you have expectations of yourselves in your own work, and if those expectations, if those sort of carry through to your work now.
I think when we were about to release the project, I think we both were very, okay with everything, but at least from my side, I was only a bit worried, how people would perceive that thing, because it's like when you had a great summer and then it's going to end. So we just enjoy the process, but now we had to, face the reality, and okay, we're going to present that project, which is, a bit maybe delicate, to understand and why we did that thing. So I was a bit afraid of, some people were really waiting, for the release, and I really wanted to make everyone happy. But at the same time, we really wanted to, be loyal, to our approach. So, and proud of, our work. So for me, it was great, and I'm happy with everything, but I just found myself a bit confused for a few months of, okay, so you should maybe focus on the next one, to make something more, follow better the rules, let's say. And maybe you're spreading too much, with your sense of what you have to do. And then you must focus a bit more on, where the practice is going, So I had this kind of personal conflict. So what should be my next project now? So I have to, and actually that was like for 1 month or two, because then I released this after a few months, this Bright Moment project, which was again not a long form itself, so it didn't last so much. But for me, it was a great moment, to balance and to understand my own work. And yeah, let's say I became stronger after that thing, because I just felt that, saying how Zach approached everything, with this naturality and just understanding exactly the same way that I understand, that you're here to create and be free. And if you want to curate, just curate. If you want to create long forms, create them. If you want to print, do just wherever you want. And I felt like, yes, we can do that. So yeah, basically my work, it's still the same, but I had this kind of personal confrontation, let's say, and then became just stronger.
Yeah, and I would say also for me it was that was the first long form work that I had made, and I had prior to that I had a project with Art Blocks that was a curated project that I was working on, and this was sort of peak, I don't know, fall 2021, and the hype and the energy at that time was pretty insane, and I found like I didn't like the way I was feeling. Like I didn't enjoy. I just felt like the pressure I was putting on myself, the kind of intensity, hanging out on Discord, listening to what people are saying, all of these things just made me really unhappy, like really, really not like who I was, not like how I was creating. And it was bad, like it was really bad, like for my mental health and, my relationships and everything. And so kind of, canceled that project. And it was this invitation to, and this chance really to collaborate with Iskra that it felt so great. It felt really like this just amazing. It felt amazing to do it, to have the chance to do the same sort of thing, but approach it in a completely different way. And then not like, several months later, we were together in Mexico. And I remember we were doing the kind of first mint of another long form work for Bright Moments. And it was so social. Like we were just hanging out in an office and everybody was like minting the first work and clapping and celebrating. And it just was like the exact opposite of how I felt in that fall, when I just felt really alone. I felt like, I don't know, I'm on Discord with these people I don't know. It just felt like really lonely, honestly. And here was this thing that was very social, that was very collaborative, even if we were doing our own work, and the same thing of, working with Iskra over the summer just felt really great to be doing it with others. So I don't know. For me, it was a chance to do something that I had really struggled with, and it felt like a great breakthrough.
I think as we come towards the conclusion, I think perhaps building on Elizabeth's question about representation, I don't want to lower the tone of the conversation, as I always do, but I personally am interested with both of your views on where this work sits within, a fine art frame, because I see some of these outputs, and they make me think of particularly late Rothko. They make me think of all sorts of different, 20th century, perhaps modernist, familiar visual images. And I wonder, of course, in one sense, I think generative art deserves its own narrative, perhaps one insulated from that kind of sort of historical touch point. But I wonder, whether, perhaps starting with Iskra, is it helpful to frame this kind of work within the history of painting? Because it seems to me, when I do see works like this printed out, hung on a wall, dare I say, that they seem to renew painting, whether they like it or not. And I don't know whether that matters to you. Do you think of your work within the history of painting?
Well, particularly with this one, I wouldn't say I see a great connection with the history of painting. I'm interested in find connections with paintings from years ago and different movements. But in this case, since for me, I mean, Zach is very well known for his very digitally nativeness, let's say, and we actually talked a lot about how we understand textures and why we should add texture to the image or not, or basic things as the margins that we kind of fight a bit, because I love margins, but Zach does not. And I think this is something that we have from the past, this concept of margin. And I agree with him that the digital works maybe doesn't need that. But, so there are many, many questions that we discussed in this project. But I think this project has no connection, at least for me, to any other, clearly defined movement or type of painting or artist, because it's very natively digital, because that's what I wanted to achieve. In other works, I tried to go, in this direction that you said, Alex, but in this one, I just tried to follow this path, from Zach. Let's do this thing and let's make it feel very, very digital, So for me, there is no connection. Actually, I have some of those forgotten systems that I really don't know what to do with them. Maybe Zach, we could, do a book or something, but that's for another spaces. But I had some of them more, organic, more organic in the structure, adding not grain, but some kind of structure of texture that I do with the lines. But the ones that I chose, definitely they don't have this kind of physical feeling at all. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and I would say from my side, I remember at the time I was reading a book called Notes from the Woodshed, which is the painter Jack Whitten has this kind of studio journal, and it's pretty amazing. He's basically kind of every day talking about his process and all the things. He was building these kind of crazy constructions to make paintings, and he wanted to make paintings in like 10 seconds, where it's like he builds a kind of complex system and then the painting gets made. And he talks a lot about feeling in the kinds of the search for feeling in his own work. And I remember that I wasn't necessarily responding to his work, but I remember when I was working on this project, thinking a lot about feeling and thinking about how to make images that convey feeling. So that was an inspiration for sure.
Thank you. I mean, from just from a personal perspective, from the sort of the viewers or the writer's perspective, it seems to me what this project really questions is, or one of the problems that it poses is, why do we use perhaps outdated visual tools to appraise, natively digital or born digital projects? And I can see that perhaps it must be frustrating to hear names like Rothko or movements like op art necessarily superimposed over a project which in many ways deserves something different. And I think this is, of course, one of the essential problems of trying to use language, which is not the code itself, to describe the work. But I appreciate you guys sharing your positions, and it's been a treat talking to you, and I hope folks take the chance to look through all of the projects from Source, because I think it's a really wonderful compendium of the work that's been produced in recent years.
Well, thank you all. Zach, Iskra, I don't know if you have any closing words, or if you wanted to speak a bit about the exhibition. I don't know if you've had a chance to go through it, but just in the last 5 minutes here, any final reflections?
I wonder, actually, Iskra, you just released a project. I would love to hear if you could just say a few words on that, like I love it, and I would love to hear just anything about it.
Yeah, sure. Well, that was 2 days ago, I think. I just lost the sense of time. This week was big crazy. So yeah, I released Edno, the third, let's say, but the second personal project in FX Cash. And yes, it's a continuation, as I said in the thread on Twitter, of this exploration of black and white in my work. I just, let's say, took this year for a bit of introspection, let's say. I think last year was very crazy and I needed some time to just, understand what I was doing. And I started the year with these black and white sketches that, the first one became Escape. And then I just found a great joy, in diving into these structures without color, being a huge fan of color. And I think the color is, in my case, at least in my practice, the element that brings, the emotions in the system. And I was wondering what I'm doing then. I mean, if the color is the element that brings, the emotions, what I'm doing with the form. And I just, decided to create this whole direction for black and white projects to discover this structure. And then hopefully, once I'm happy with my own understanding of the structure, I can, start again adding color. And yeah, basically Edno is, means one in Bulgarian, wanted to create this kind of, taxonomy. And it's a very minimal project. I wanted to see, how can I play with different grades of from white to black, passing by many tones of gray, and creating these shades with the shaders, a very, very simple shaders. And yeah, and then just about 3 days before the release, I thought about why maybe I could I could add a bit of color. So I did these small variations, and yeah, this is more or less about the project. And answering your question before. So the first thing that I want to say is that I'm super happy to be part of this exhibition, but honestly very happy. I really appreciate, well, first of all, the curators. I mean, it's an honor, to be validated, because this is the word. I mean, and I really appreciate that. I see Casey here, but everyone involved, and operator and DevBeef, I'm a huge admirer. So when I learned, that we were gonna be inside the show, for me it was amazing. The first thing that I found interesting was it's not a commercial show, and that fits perfectly with Horizons, Horizontes, because it's the same kind of human approach and not market-based approach, and it felt like again a celebration, and I'm just proud, to have this very special project in such a special exhibition. So everything just came together in the perfect way.
Nice. I also just want to say a huge thank you to Ferrophile. Casey, there was a project that Casey invited me to be a part of many years ago called A2P, I think I have the name right, but it was something that involved artists just making artwork and sharing it with each other and kind of experimenting with blockchain technologies. It was like really early days, but I remember there was a spirit of generosity, and that was something that I think is really reflected in this project with Iskra. And then also just want to say a shout out to FX Hash, who I see is in the audience, because it was really, this project came about because of their kind of generous and kind invitation to collaborate, which was a fun prompt. But also they were like really fun to work with, and we didn't even get into some of the drama, but like there was really, I described the project as being really chill and kind of laid back, but like Iskra, folks from the FX Hash team remember Iskra, like seconds, away from having to fix things and being on Discord calls and so on. It was really like, it was pretty chaotic and interesting. And I just want to thank everybody. Thank Alex and right-click save and so on for facilitating this conversation.
Yeah, chaotic was the word. Yeah, I think I would just take this chance, to publicly say sorry, and thanks for everything, because that was, we were screaming. I remember you screaming, Zach. It was, that was a disaster. Yeah. But
Yeah.
from them, I think we just became better friends, after that. So thank you.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Thank you so much for sharing. We'll have to have a tell-all as a part 2, and we'll bring out FX Hash on the stage. No, but really, thank you all so much for joining us today. We'll go ahead and close out if that sounds good. Alex, did you have any parting words?
No, just to thank you for having me, and it's been a real treat hearing the artist's take on their work.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much. Deepest gratitude to Iskra, Zach, and Alex. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope that all of you have here too. And yes, thank you everyone in the audience for joining, especially I see right-click save, or sorry, I do see right-click save. And I also see FX Hash, who is the reason that this project kind of got off the ground in the first place. And also one of our curators, Casey Reas. So thank you all so much. And Anya was here earlier. I think Def Beef jumped in. So really, thank you all. This is such an extraordinary exhibition, and we're so glad that you're part of it, and glad that you're part of the Source Talk series as well. And I also just want to say a special thanks to Zach and Iskra about opening up about what the work meant to you then at the time and what it means to you now. This has really been a special opportunity, this whole exhibition, to reflect on process. And with such an intimate collaborative process that the two of you had, it's really nice to hear a bit more about it. And so with that, I will go ahead and close this out with a sneak peek of what we're doing next week. So on Monday, we're going to sit down with Lauren Lee McCarthy, Primavera Di Filippi, Sarah Friend in a talk called Feeding the Machine. And that's going to be moderated by Source curator Anya Catherine of Operator. And then also next week, we have talks with artists including Jonas Lund, Maya Mann, Siebren Verstig, Dada, Sasha Stiles, Sarah Zucker, Anna Lucia, Travis Smalley, and Finger Code. And we are very grateful that we have a couple Source curators joining us as well. As I mentioned, Anya Catherine will moderate the Feeding the Machine talk. Dija T will moderate a talk with Sasha Stiles and Dada. And Def Beef will be part of a conversation with Jonas Lund, moderated by Whitney Hart. And other moderators include Vinny Valenzuela and Madeline Pierpont. So again, just so grateful and so happy to share this moment with you. This has been The Edges of Code with Iskra Velitchkova, Zach Lieberman, and Alex Estorick. My name is Elizabeth Sweet, and I wish you all a wonderful weekend. And if you're in New York, please stay dry, or try to. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great week, and see you tomorrow, or see you Monday.
Thank you.
All right. Bye. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.